Just to start with, we're gonna make it a real hard talk because you couldn't get a better panel from this. You have a legislator, you have regulator, you have advisor to the government, you have a community representation, and you have an operator here. So we're gonna make it as interactive as we can. Yes? Okay, I wanted to start with a famous quote from historian Henry Adams, who said, "Chaos was the law of nature, order was the dream of man." So everybody sitting here agrees that we're going through a disruptive technology boom, the DLT, blockchain, and all of you are ardent believers of it. Wanted to know your opinion on the policies and regulations in this. So let's start with the regulator, Chris.
Thank you very much, and it's a very great pleasure to be here today. So, as mentioned, I'm a financial regulator, and I've been a regulator both here in the UAE for Abu Dhabi and also in the UK for the FCA. And I'm very much pro a very proactive and collaborative approach by regulators when it comes to new technology. The reason for this is that disruption is absolutely necessary for financial services to improve and to grow. So things like, for example, regulatory sandboxes are very, very powerful for regulators to get to know new technologies and the startup environment.
Okay, so from a regulatory sandbox to moving to, say, in Malta, we have the VFA Act, and Malta being the blockchain island of the world. So what's the journey been like?
Well, basically, the approach we've taken in Malta is quite different. I mean, we look at the disruptive nature of this technology, and we decided to follow a path that looks at the technology arrangement and service first. Understand that properly, create a regulatory framework that will define the parameters of what constitutes a technology arrangement, how innovative that is, and then regulate the services around it. And we had to sit down and get people from various sectors, whether it's legal experts, whether it's financial experts, whether it's technologists, to sit around the table and try to figure out how to regulate this technology. Because if you think about it, like everything we've ever regulated before in history, this is more or less a regulation for engineers, which has to be done by engineers. One has to understand what is the innovation, what is the technology on a code level before you'll be able to understand how you'll be able to regulate it. And what we've done in Malta is that last year we've passed 3 laws. The 3 laws try to encompass the various aspects of how this technology is going to disrupt various sectors. So number 1, we created an entity or a regulator, which is the Malta Digital Innovation Authority, that will be in charge of certifying such technology arrangements. Number 2, we passed a law which is called the ITAS law, or the Innovative Technology Arrangements and Services law, that defines what is innovative technology. And we decided to keep it simple. We decided from day 1 to start with DLT, or decentralized ledger technologies, out of which blockchain is an architecture, with a vision from day 1 to move into IoT, AI, and other innovative technologies eventually. But to keep it simple, we said with DLT, innovation is on the software front, on the architecture front, and on the smart contract front. So let's first start with the definitions of those. And then within the law, the minister is allowed to update this definition as time goes by. And this was quite important because technology is quite dynamic. It's changeable. The only thing that's constant in technology is change itself. So we wanted to have that dynamic element for the definitions themselves. So that's for the blockchain side. But then obviously we have the financial aspects of it, which is the cryptocurrency side. And for that we had to pass another law which falls under the financial services regulator, which is the VFA law, the Virtual Financial Assets Law, which draws the distinctions between things such as security tokens, utility tokens, financial instruments, and look at that accordingly. Again, blockchain does not stop at financial services. So other regulators, such as our communication regulator or gaming regulator, had to come up with sandboxes that are following structures whereby they define parameters on how this technology is going to be used, and then get certification from the MDIA that such technology arrangements or services are actually innovative. So the structure is tech-driven in Malta, and so far it's worked very well. The laws came into effect end of last year. Just yesterday, the first VFA agents were approved, and now the licensing and the certification process has started for lots of companies. So we're now seeing a lot of companies from all around the world are coming to Malta because they needed such legal certainty.
Thank you so much for sharing this. So what would be your take on this, Nicholas, from Australia, and what the Australian government or the adaptation of technology has been there?
I guess representing an industry body, the innovators that are trying to advance this technology, the way we see it is that regulators really need to, I think, approach this in two phases. The initial phase is to understand that there does not have to be a trade-off between consumer protection and innovation. Right? It is in fact entirely possible, and in fact what regulators should be aiming to do, to achieve both of those goals at once. And the type of models that we're hearing about, where there is a sandbox or some sort of a collaborative engagement between regulators and industry, is the best way to do that. The second stage, and not many countries have really made much progress on this stage yet, is actually to understand that blockchain technology makes it possible to rethink the whole model of the way we do regulation. And that's a new opportunity that in the end is going to become very powerful. Almost every regulator around the world suffers from an inherent difficulty in that they simply don't have the resources to be able to achieve the goals that are set out for them all of the time at the sort of an acceptable cost. And as soon as they fail, they get open to criticism. So it's a really difficult job for them, right? Blockchain technology does create the possibility of a new regulatory model where almost all transactions can be compliant by design. And getting to that stage is the ultimate evolution of this conversation, I think.
All right. Jihad, I would like to ask you, what has been the Do Telecom's approach to the technology, and how is it supporting by going out to the startups or to the big players?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much first for inviting me to the panel, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to pick on what you mentioned in the beginning of the panel when you start talking about change, basically, and the challenges there. So when you started looking at blockchain from Do's perspective as a nationwide mobile telecom operator and what we can do and how we can, enter this arena, we soon enough realized that there's a challenge here. So there is first of all, it's a buzzword. Everybody is hyped about it. Everybody is excited about blockchain. But at the same time, it's a change story. It's a change management. It's a general change, and people typically resist change. So we started meeting customers who are interested to work on blockchain, but who wanted to change the process, replicate the same process they have on blockchain, which doesn't really make sense. If you're not improving your process, if you're not making it seamless, if you're not, removing the friction points, you don't really need blockchain. Okay, so this is where we started, and we started looking at what can we do basically to help in this ecosystem. So we decided to build a platform, a blockchain platform as a service. That was the first one in the region. We announced that last year, and it will be launched in the first half of this year. And this is a service that can be consumed like a cloud service. So you don't have to, if you're a small business, if you're a small enterprise, even larger enterprise, government, can go on and consume that service from the cloud, online. They can talk to us as well, but you can configure the amount of nodes you want, the service you want, the forms, you can use them online, and you can build it based on an Ethereum flavor or on a Hyperledger flavor as well. And we recently, actually, we're announcing today that we are collaborating with Smart Dubai. It will be one of Smart Dubai platform, basically, for the transformation and the paperless strategy, the blockchain strategy of the government. So So we're doing all those initiatives in line with the UAE strategy, and as well more focus on Dubai for the Dubai strategy to have blockchain in all government entities and to enable paperless strategy in December 2021.
Amazing. And from Emma, we would really like to hear about what's happening in Eastlands, where you're promoting blockchain and you've already started using it in industry for the trade finance. The program that you started last year
Yeah,
and got approval
from the
EU.
European Parliament experience, from my side, blockchain has definitely been the buzzword, and it goes around. But we've only began really with my report in the International Trade Committee to apply blockchain to look at a specific policy sector. And so my report on the future of trade policy using blockchain was really the first time that we examined that. And what is really important to understand is that as regulators, we have to have a full understanding. As policymakers, we really need to understand the technology of blockchain and how it works and what it's capable of doing and what it's not capable of doing in order to know whether we need to step in to regulate or not. And I think that we need to take a holistic approach to this and make sure that all stakeholders are involved in deciding this moment in time that we need to come together in order to form a policy on it. But it is absolutely something that we're monitoring. The EU has started the Blockchain Observatory. We are working in these policy areas. DG Connect is very much focused on this area and bringing together partners from many different countries. We have 21 member states working together along with Norway in examining where the need for blockchain to be applied as a solution in policy areas, but then also when we need to step in to say, okay, we need to bring the legislation in. But I deeply believe that we're in a race to innovate, not a race to regulate. And for me, I think there will be a moment in time, but right now we need to be monitoring, seeing where existing legislation can be applied in this policy and where we need to step in to do more.
I think one of the interesting points I will open to the whole panel is that when we look at policy making, as you rightfully mentioned, that this technology is something where policymakers would like to see it from a distance, or they would like to get involved fully and start regulating every stakeholder the way Malta has done it, or we look at a more digital sandbox type of situation here, what we've taken here in UAE. So what would be your take on these?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak on that. So, as a regulator, I think there are different types of regulator. In terms of what we do and lots of other regulators do, we like to get our hands dirty and into technology. And really that involves two things. First of all, hiring the right expertise, and then secondly, experimentation. So, in the course of our experimentation, the people that we've hired, where we see a lot of growth is tokenization of assets like securities, of fiat, of money itself. You mentioned regulation, how it can automate rulebooks. We looked at that as well. How do you make a regulation or an entire rulebook machine readable so that you can program a new application, say, with compliance embedded in the code itself, or maybe using smart contracts to monitor compliance with our rules. We're also exploring how to use new encryption methodologies on one of the blockchain protocols to transmit private information securely. It's called homomorphic encryption. Also, there's a technique called zero-knowledge proof, which helps you do this. In terms of how we actually do all this experimentation, we have various different tools. We're very collaborative, but we'll be launching later on this year our digital sandbox, which is effectively where us, the financial regulator, will give the private sector a portion of our cloud environment. And the startups and the financial institutions can collaborate on there. They can exchange information, ideas, and data. It is completely free for startups. And that is how we try to engage the ecosystem. I completely agree, we're not in a race to regulate, but because the innovators are moving so very quickly, it is our responsibility as policymakers and regulators to keep up with them as much as we can.
There's always been a gap between regulation and technology race, and which will always be on. So
Also, I would like to add, we have to be very careful when even we use the word regulation. So I'm a technologist. I really don't like the word regulation. as soon as you hear the word regulation, you feel like your innovation is being stifled, you're being shackled, you can't actually think. Which is why, again, coming back to the approach we used in Malta, we made sure from day one that whatever we do will not end up stifling the innovative process in any way, shape, or form, which is why we have regulation, we have licensing for those activities that require licensing, mainly when they have anything to do with financial activity, but we have a certification process for innovative technology arrangements whereby the regulator or the entity would certify whether a certain architecture is scalable, is secure, you'll be able to add extra applications on top of it, and it's more or less an audit or an assessment of the architecture and the software part of things. It's by no means a licensing process or a regulation or a strict regulation, as much as it's a certification process to show that regulatory body has looked at that technology on a code level and certified that it's scalable, secure, and looking at various things from the qualities, the attributes, the features, or even the behavior of that piece of software. We noticed that just introducing that certification process was actually attractive to a lot of projects, a lot of entities, to even add to the credibility of these projects from an innovation standpoint, because at the end of the day, even when coming back to the financial part of it, I personally believe ICO days where raising money with just a white paper are over, and projects are actually seeking some form of credibility by having regulatory bodies looking at their technology even from a granular level. So we draw a distinction between what is licensable, what is certifiable, and in many cases as well, when, again, especially with those that do not touch financial services or gaming activities, we certify them in order for these projects to showcase that what they're doing is quite solid.
So when we mention about testing the technology through MDIA, again, back to you, Jihad, I would like to ask you, do you come across a situation where do we have that much of talent in this field already? Like, do we have that many coders and developers making the technology as well as to work with the regulators, or we're still going through the phase where we're still testing?
Actually, I like the comment that you made, basically, the challenge or the tension between innovation and the regulation. Yes, definitely it's there. And we see this everywhere we go in terms of, specifically on the blockchain side, in general everywhere, but on the blockchain side more specifically. Now, the way we're going around it is, as you said, so you're doing testing, you're doing pilots, very true, the resources and the right skills are a bit scarce, and there are a lot of development program to help and educate software developers to come up to speed. And we work closely with Consensus, who did a lot of those initiatives to train developers for this, to get that skill. But the way we're doing it, I'll give you an example and I want to move away from whether the regulation will allow or not in this context. So we focus on enterprise blockchain. So we're not talking anywhere near, financial services in this context, which is, in my mind, way more regulated than the enterprise blockchain. So on the enterprise blockchain, what we focus on is to find a solution. So together with our role as an enabler on the horizontal platform play, we look at small startups that have a nice idea, that have an idea that can be developed and that can make a difference in the market. So let's take the certification of university degrees. I cannot claim at this stage that without a regulation and without the availability of development and skill that we can transform all the universities to issue their degrees on blockchain. However, what we did instead is we bridge a little bit of the gap, and to try and take that original certificate you have. So if you have a student working abroad and they want to do all the round of certification, at the final round, which is the embassy, let's say the UAE embassy abroad, instead of putting that stamp, we can put, and we have a showcase now in our stand, we can put a barcode, which is a hash code, a blockchain encrypted hash code, that is a certification of the document. Where is the challenge and how do we come about? Sometimes, and in this case, if you don't have a regulation, you come back, you want to work, you want to be employed, they don't accept this barcode. So what we did is that we created a simple tool online where you can upload the electronic version or even the scanned version, the actual version, the physical version. You scan it, and you can, it will tell you whether this is a verified version or not. So those things are, I don't want to call them halfway, but it's a step into the full digitization, the full blockchainization, if that's a term, where you can move on and enable all those services. In parallel, it's very important as well to keep in mind that, yes, it's important to do POCs, and it's very important, but you need to focus on the use cases that will make a difference. And we're looking at cases on the healthcare side, where we showcased this a while ago, and it's still on our stand here, a blood bag, or pharmaceutical medicines, a simple NFC tag where you can connect it through IoT, wireless technology, look at on your mobile phone, scan it, and through the blockchain engine that is, crypto proof, it will confirm that whether this medicine or the blood bag has been tampered with, or it has been exposed to unnecessary heat and other stuff. And what I want to add as well is, a lot of the times we do proof of concepts and they fail. It's fine. It's not the end of the way. It's very important to do those, move on, and move to the next proof of concept. It's a new technology, and we don't want the regulation to slow the innovation in this context.
I think this is the point, is that we can't keep up as policymakers with the pace of the revolution that's happening with technology. And if you over-regulate too soon, there's no flexibility left for then these new innovations to come. But we need to be mindful of monitoring where it's going, so that we can, one, understand where it can provide us solutions. Let's remember that blockchain is very transformative. It can provide us with real solutions that will help us as policymakers and help us with our governance. But we must choose the moment in time and follow that and allow for that. I think that the work that's been done in Malta is very interesting, as well as what they've been doing in Her Majesty's government in Gibraltar, setting out a framework that we can work towards. But if we don't want to restrict it at this stage, because the potential is huge. And we're only, a few years into this digital revolution that's happening, and we need to, as policymakers, be educated, monitoring it, but allowing for that innovation, because particularly, we want to lead in this. And I think it is really interesting watching what's happening all around the world, and we need to communicate what we're doing, what the use cases are, what pilot projects are being run, what is the best policy, what can we exchange in terms of best practice amongst ourselves. And that will lead in the future to an international standard. But right now we need to be understanding the technology, monitoring it, and putting frameworks in place, and letting it see where it can go.
So we could say that we're moving from a rule-based framework from a rule-based regulator to principle-based regulators, where we're looking at broader frameworks and outcome of the technology rather than monitoring every stakeholder involved. So do we see that as a way
We are
forward?
trying to be as anticipatory as we possibly can. But when it's changing and shifting, you can't lock in technology, or it will move on, and then you'll have to re-legislate for something. So you need to allow the room for this technology to innovate, to move, to grow. But at the same time, there do need to be principles to underpin this. And we should really only be regulating if there is a weakness, ordinarily, or if we need to give confidence to investors. And that is, I'm sure, where the movement in Malta has come from, to ensure that investors who are confident to continue making investments in technology. But there is a balance, and I think it is a holistic solution and a holistic approach we need to take over time to understand the technology and when we need to step in as policymakers.
If I could offer a thought on this. I guess firstly, an important observation is we don't regulate a technology per se, right? So blockchain in its various forms is just a tool, right? The focus for any regulatory attention is what you're going to do with that tool. And I think there's probably three categories that might be useful. When I think about most of the blockchain use cases that are starting to get some traction, supply chain, trade finance, health records, things like that, I think the regulatory challenge in that space is probably to just look at the mechanics of the way regulation is implemented. So the basic idea, should a doctor have a credential that they can prove before they perform surgery? Yes. How are we going to validate that? It might be different using blockchain than the way we do it today, right? But it's a technical challenge about the mechanics of regulation. The second area is where blockchain is used in effect to offer a financial service of some form. And this area is a little bit trickier, and it's probably where we need to go back to core principles. Where the blockchain solution is in effect operating as a currency or money transmittance device, then we need to say, well, can it be abused for money laundering or terrorist financing? If that's a risk, we need to find out how to deal with that. Where it's being used as a capital raising device, we need to say, do investors have full disclosure of what they're getting into? Is the market protected against manipulation? These are sound principles that we've learned the hard way over hundreds of years of experience that we need to have those protections. The third area is the one that I think is the most interesting, and that's where a blockchain model relies upon so-called tokenomics to create the scale effects that make the whole business case for that blockchain-based solution work. And this is the area which probably requires the most detailed sort of intellectual thinking about how we want to regulate that space. It's the trickiest part. We're seeing some good progress there as well. But again, some of those core principles about at least disclosure, do people know what they're getting into? Do they have access to a liquid market, etc., a market that can't be manipulated? They're sound principles as well. So I think trying to separate it into those three categories might at least be useful for the task of identifying where effort needs to go.
Thank you all. So on the last, I would like to ask everybody, what would be your takeaway from this discussion? Again, back to your roles independently as a regulator, as an industry representative, advisor, legislator, and operator. So just your parting words on these.
I'd say that as a regulator, always remain mindful of not restricting innovation where it is responsible, legislating only where necessary, and also being open to different types of technology. So we are technology agnostic, like a lot of financial regulators are. Whether you are issuing shares on a certificated basis, so a paper on a piece of paper, or using a blockchain token to issue shares, you'll be treated exactly the same under our regulation, and I think that should remain the case. Also, don't be afraid of getting your hands dirty. Read some white papers. Try to understand the messaging and the protocols. That really helps. And also, just talk to as many people as you can. Talk to other regulators. Talk to the technology companies. Talk to the startups. Talk to the financial services firms. Only by learning from each other and having an open dialogue can you possibly hope to create a safe but also very advanced financial market.
Abdullah, you would like to add?
I mean, I completely agree. Like, the most important thing is obviously innovation. Blockchain is actually disrupting and redefining a lot of the concepts, that we are used to, like from value to the concept of identities, etc. So we need to allow the innovative process to grow and prosper. But at the same time, we have to be very responsible. We need to make sure that any potential misuse of this technology would actually be impeded or stopped. Also, we need to continue this dialogue. In Malta, we look at what everyone else is doing. We've been to Dubai a couple of times last year, and we are quite fascinated with the approach that has been taken in Dubai, and we're quite grateful to the authorities here that have spoken to us and also shared some information with us, because at the end of the day, it is not only a collaboration process, it's a co-creation process. This is a new industry, it's a new technology, and everything that's coming is new. But also we need to, again, speak to each other, have more of such events. In Malta this October we have Delta Summit, which is our counterpart event to the Future Summit here. So we invite everyone in here, all the thought leaders, the innovators, the policy makers, and the pioneers in this space to come and share their vision, insight, and also strategic foresight of where this industry is gonna move. No one has a monopoly of the truth. This is completely new. So we need to speak to each other, exchange notes, and hopefully help or be a part of making this technology good for everyone in the world.
Emma?
Yeah. I've been very inspired by the summit and being here, and I think I would take away a lot from Smart Dubai and their approach to technology. They don't see it as the end game. It is building blocks to a better quality of life. So I would say that creators and innovators should not be afraid of policymakers. No policymakers afraid of creators and innovators. We need to work together. We can transform, by the use of the blockchain technology, the lives of people and make life better. And that is something that we need to do when we understand each other and we communicate a lot better. So let's keep this dialogue going, and let's see if we can use this to really harness the power to change lives.
Amazing.
I guess one observation I'd make, most of this discussion, or in fact all of this discussion, has been about the responsibility or whatever of regulators to encourage innovation, or at least not stand in the way of innovation. And then people talk about collaboration. Well, collaboration involves two sides. So I guess some observations about the responsibility of industry in this dialogue is also quite important, right? We shouldn't just be saying, hey, regulators, we want you to make a perfect world for us, right? That's an unreasonable expectation. And I think it is actually incumbent on industry players to take a lead in starting to shape some of this dialogue as well. Something that we did in Australia that I'm quite proud of is for our association. Nearly 4 years ago now, we brought in the Australian Digital Currency Industry Code of Conduct. That was a self-regulatory code, and we said that if you're going to be a member of ADCA, my association, you must have anti-money laundering protections in place, even though at the time there was no legal requirement to do so. All right? Now that was important because we didn't want to be associated with money laundering or terrorist financing. Right? We wanted to actually see this digital currencies emerge as a viable solution. But because we did that, we actually then earned the trust of the regulators to say, okay, you're trying to do the right thing here. Now let's talk about a new model. And then Australia became one of the first jurisdictions in the world to actually formally regulate digital currencies within its AML regime. Now that, in my view, is a very constructive process of dialogue between industry and regulators. And to the extent that that model can be copied in other issues, I think it's one that's quite useful.
Agreed.
I think as a general takeaway, I mean, first of all, we're lucky in the UAE that we don't really have that challenge into whether we can innovate or not, because the leadership is very clear about the direction. So we have to do it. But in general, innovate, and don't wait for regulatory framework. Keep pushing the boundaries. Don't be afraid of failing, or don't get slowed down by any setback, because this is where we're going. I mean, technology is there as a tool, and we're going into that direction. And I'm very proud and happy to say that this is what we're doing in Do. So the idea of doing a city journey that was announced yesterday here across the blockchain event, inside the event, we really jumped directly into it, and we were, it's the first tokenization, if you want, element. We work with the Dubai World Trade Center and with a company called 137, and we developed this, the whole, a way to show end users how seamless and frictionless the experience of blockchain can be. Okay, so it's just a showcase now, but soon enough it will be implemented in the city, and it's kind of a tokenization of a digital identity. It's many things linked together to show how the future will look like in the city.
Thank you so much. I leave it up to the audience. Any questions? I think it's been really a hard talk, and everybody's got what they wanted to know from the different panelists we've had here. Thank you.